Thank you so much. Thank you guys for coming out for this. Don't forget the one rule of the Editor's Lounge, no throwing fruits, vegetables, or spitballs. Editing has gone through so many changes. As we know, when we switched over to nonlinear editors, it wreaked a lot of havoc in the editing room, good and bad. And so we're going to talk about how that's impacted the relationship, what the editor does, what the assistant does, and their relationship, and how that also impacts the pathway for somebody who wants to be an editor. First, I'd like to just introduce our panelists. All the way on my right is Diana Friedberg. Diana, do you want to just tell us just a tad about your credits? And I know you're the co-author of a book on editing, right?
Okay, so basically, I'm a South African from many years back, and have been in the States, had 20 years career out in South Africa, worked on like 19 features, had the distinction of being the first woman to direct a feature in South Africa, came to the States, had to start again right from the bottom, after 20 years of being right at the top, and having done features and television. Started in South Africa in 1976, so it was a whole new world for everybody. Everybody went over to TV. We did episodic, multi-languages, all the African languages, Afrikaans, English, episodic, animation, documentaries, we did it all. And so I got involved in doing all aspects of editing, not just pigeonholed into features, but then the new market became television. So came here, worked on my first break, which is a story I always tell at some point, on an HBO feature directed by Danny Mann, who was a famous director. You probably all know about him. So I got onto that as a second assistant, and ended up with the credit as an editor.
You know, rather than tell your story of going, making it to editor, because we are going to talk about it, the whole path of going up.
All right, so then I've been here for 20 years. I've worked mostly on reality, documentaries, and episodic.
Great. Karsten, tell us a little bit about...
Multicultural here. I'm from Germany. I had no career whatsoever in Germany. Came here, started at the bottom, and I started here in Orthodox, and I've been an assistant editor ever since. In the last 3 years, I came here in 2007, and I did reality. Now I'm going between features and television, episodic, scripted.
And now we have Stephen Cohen.
Yeah, so all right, I'll try to do this really quick.
Great.
I'm an editor. I've worked in features and television for a long time now. I've worked very closely. I started on film, was film editor, and then was an early adopter of the Avid, and worked very closely with the people at Avid for many years, and I'm working very closely with them now. I wrote a book in the early days about the media composer. I just finished another book, which just went on sale a week and a half ago. But you can get it at Amazon. It's called Avid Agility. And Pete and I are working together on a show. And
what show were you guys working on?
It's called November Christmas. It's a Hallmark Hall of Fame.
Okay. And Peter, do you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, my name is Peter Burgas. I'm an assistant editor. I've done some editing as well. I've been an assistant editor for about 13 years, mostly features, some TV, long-form TV. I've worked with Steve on this project and another project 8 years ago. We stayed in touch the whole time, but sort of never got back in sync, so I'm happy to be working with him again, and I'm happy to be here tonight.
Great, thank you so much. Are you all in the Guild? Are you all Guild members here?
Yes.
Yes. I think this would be a good point for the two full-fledged editors here to talk a little bit. I mean, I'd love, Diana, to hear your story, but how did you go from being the apprentice to assistant, editor? What were the things that enabled you to bump your way up?
I think luck and determination. I started, as I said, in South Africa in a commercial house and worked for a year, and then I said, no, I want to do features. So I then found out the people I worked with got me into Pinewood Studios in England as an apprentice, as a supernumerary they called me. So I actually bought a ticket on a boat, went to London, got to Pinewood, worked with them for a few months on American features, and then my time was up. I went back to South Africa, and then I got into working as an assistant editor on features, which is what I wanted to do with that experience. So that got me going, and so I did that with no pay, which is one of the basics of moving yourself up, is to do your work as an assistant and just do it as a non-paying job, and then ultimately it will pay itself off. So that's one of my tips to do it. Just work for free. Just don't be shy, work for free. As you said, no pay, but it's inevitable. You have to do it.
What about you, Stephen? Did you go through the whole apprentice, second assistant, first assistant? Did you do that whole
Yeah, but I
arc?
did it more than once in different ways.
Really?
Because I started in New York I'd gone to college and then worked as a messenger boy for a commercial company in New York, riding a bicycle around in New York, carrying film cans around. It was actually sort of fun, but very degrading after an Ivy League college education.
Yeah.
And then very quickly became an assistant for them. And they moved me to California on the back of his moving van and ended up here. And then essentially had to get into the union again. I was in the union in New York, had to get in again. So I was a dual card holder for years until the unions merged. And worked my way up through the system here, and a lot of what I had done in New York wasn't really recognized or acknowledged as professional. And then, as many people do, is you do some editing and you do it possibly for free or for smaller things, and then you're assisting to make money, and you get very frustrated assisting, and you reach this point where you just can't do it anymore. And that happened to me several times. And it was during one of those periods where I had sort of given up on the business and then had come back to get my hours for health insurance and was working in a tape vault, just had sort of given up on the whole idea, and got the call that, it's like out of these corny Hollywood stories, because I had assisted on these shows and this producer had recognized what I was doing, and he called me, his line producer called me, and it was one of those classic moments of, I figured they wanted me to come in and assist, and he called and said, "Do you want to cut our next movie of the week?" And I had that, the classic deer in the headlights, that blah, 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 okay. And then, was able to keep working and stayed at that. That was the editing job that I stayed an editor after that.
It's interesting how both of you had to start all over. You had your editing career, and then you moved, and you had to start like all over again, as if the first part hadn't happened. Right. That must have been very discouraging the second go-around.
For me, it was very difficult. But coming here, and I had 2 kids and a husband, 2 little ones, and I had to earn a living, and didn't have the right work permit papers. We had a company. Anyway, I took this job, and as I said, if you work your way and you prove yourself and you work hard and you have the right attitude, you can do anything. And that's kind of my philosophy. If you prove it, and you're good at what you do, obviously, you have to be.
So Karsten and Peter, you're both assistants. How long have you assisted for, and how do you see your path ahead in terms of moving from assisting to editing?
I've been an assistant for, like I said, about 13 years.
About 13 years, yeah.
It was a little bit, just getting to assistant editing was a little bit of a convoluted path, but I've had the opportunity and the good fortune to do some editing, even get credit as an editor, and get to get paid as an editor. Steve's right. It does take a lot of luck and perseverance. Certainly these sorts of networking things are important as well. You have to keep your name out there, and certainly when given the opportunity, you have to do a good job.
But I mean, I'm sure it's frustrating, because I've talked to other people where you're assisting, you get a chance to edit, but then you don't necessarily stick at the edit, then you go back to assisting.
The first time you're cutting, you're like, this is great. You're sitting there with the director, and it's a wonderful feeling, and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this forever. And then, that's it. Directors work once every 5 years, so you're not going to see him again. And you need to keep working, so you take a job as an assistant. And, I mean, if the economy's bad enough, you're happy even for that sort of work. So, it can be very frustrating, but just make the most of your opportunities, I guess.
Right. And Karsten, what's your story in terms of editing and trying to move up the food chain?
I was a late bloomer. In Germany, I was a tax officer for a couple of years, actually.
Oh my God.
I went back to school and, IRS, Germany. And then I did an exchange program in Ball State, Muncie, Indiana. And I met my wife, and now wife. And that kind of opened up the opportunity of actually moving to America, which I hadn't thought about it at all. So that was, and then you kind of look at it pragmatically as just what can I do? And having done short films as a directing, writing, editing, and film school, the part that I enjoyed the most was editing. So I thought, well, that's A, a good career, B, it's my passion. Let's try to make that happen. So I kind of knew what I wanted to do when I came here, which is really good because I didn't have to struggle finding my way. And Alpha Dogs gave me a home. Actually, I started here working as a PA and try to learn the ropes, seeing an Avid in real life and all that stuff. And got lucky, got the American Cinema Editors internship, which Laura Jane Coleman, the co-author of the book Make the Cut with Diana, Diana and Laurie run that internship every year, and I got lucky. I got in and I saw a couple of great editorials in Hollywood, and then had to get my union days, which I did here at Alpha Dogs at a show for Discovery. And after I got my union days, I started working indie features and television, and have been doing that for 3 years now.
Tell me, those of you who've been in editing a long time, how the relationship has changed between editor and assistant. And I don't know, you've been, the whole time you've been editing, nonlinear editors have been...
No, I've worked on film.
You did work on film.
Yeah,
so I'm sure you all have something to say about how that relationship has changed. Diana, do you want to start?
Yes, when you're with film, you're basically in the room with your editor most of the time. You're sitting there, you're taking the trims from them, you're hanging them up, you're passing the trims back. We're talking about film. So you have this ongoing, complete relationship where one-on-one all day long, really, talking and being in the room with the editor, because your assistant was just hanging trims and rolling them up and finding the shot and the missing 2 frames and doing all that kind of work and keeping the logs. But you basically would sit on the other side of the room with the editor. So you could look over their shoulder when you weren't busy, you could watch them editing, you could watch their style, you could have a one-on-one relationship with them. Today, of course, it's totally different. You're in another room, you don't have that intimate relationship with the editor at all, and it's just totally different. You just don't learn the same way as you did when there was film, because you could actually watch the editor working all day and learn from and watch them what their cuts were, how they did it. And today you don't do that. You just have to watch the finished cut at the end of the day on your monitor, and so it's a totally isolated, different relationship.
I mean,
Steve, what
have your experiences?
Well, yeah, I didn't actually work in film quite the way you did. We were on moviolas and...
Oh, I was flatbeds.
Yeah, on the flatbed you're taking the trims, and flatbed's a very labor-intensive process.
Yes.
But even though it was more... The editor worked by himself much more, and I certainly worked by myself on film, but nevertheless there was more labor than there is now. So my editing breaks came because it was a 3-person environment to do a television movie, an editor, an assistant, an apprentice, and if the editor was up against a problem, I would cut something and the apprentice would sync the dailies. Well, we don't have, we're doing a similar thing, but there's only 2 of us. And so there's less bandwidth for the assistant is doing more assisting work and less editing. I don't think it's horribly different, but it's definitely different. And the path upward, I think, is slower now than it was. There was a rule when I started that you had to assist for 8 years before you could edit. And I was big mover and shaker in the group that changed that and essentially started all the reforms of the union, which are taken for granted now. But 8 years seemed like an eternity to us. And now people assist for longer than that, and it's not that uncommon, I know somebody who has been assisting for 16 years. She's very capable and entirely ready to edit and should be editing. And part of that is the technology, part of it is the isolation. You're much more isolated as an assistant, regardless of how you worked in film. The assistant is rarely in my room. And it's not a good setup. And also the assisting work is more technical now than it used to be. You have less bandwidth to do things creative.
So the job itself, the assistant's job has become less creative.
The assistant's job is, and it's much more difficult, it seems to me.
No, I agree with that. I think you've really got to know technology, you've got to know how to hook up machines, you've got to be a troubleshooter. If there are problems in the room, you're the one who's got to solve it. Most cases, editors, old-timers like me, we don't know all that high-tech stuff, and we rely totally on our assistants. We know how to edit, and that's what we do. and we rely on our assistants to do everything else. And if there's a problem in the room, we rely on them, we call them in, you fix it. And we expect you to fix it, right, Carsten? So, that's the difference. Where in the old days, you were just standing there winding up reels of film and syncing them up, and you were on the other side of the room, as we said earlier, and you were creatively involved. And there isn't anything. You're probably busy all day just sorting out the computer, the dailies, the syncing problems, and everything else that has to be taken care of. You're a business manager. You really and truly are. And a good technician. You have to
that
be
was, it's funny because I came in here thinking I was going to agree with that.
No,
and the
you
more
don't.
I think about it, I'm not sure I do.
Well, let's argue
Because
about
as an
it still, yes.
assistant, I hated how technical it was. And I always felt as an assistant that there was so little that I was doing that was creative.
You mean on film?
On film,
Oh,
yeah.
on film.
Really, on film
And
as
that-
well.
I never assisted digitally, but it was mind-numbingly uncreative. And,
Well,
and
let's
just
ask
awful.
Peter,
Got
because
boring.
he's assisted both in film and digitally, right?
Yeah,
Compare and contrast.
Well, film had a certain, romantic quality, and so there was something like you knew you were in the film industry because you had film on your hands.
Right.
So
What a concept.
that didn't last very long, but yeah, I remember being really excited initially, working as an apprentice, and when you're an apprentice, you reconstitute dailies.
Oh, yeah.
No one in this room probably knows what that is, but you learn how to splice, and you became really proud of your splice. Look at this splice. That's a
perfect.
splice. So I wasn't as down on it, I think, as Steve was. A lot of it really depends on the crew, on the editor, the other assistants, and how much they want to involve you in the process. Some editors do just lock themselves in a room, even in the film days. The job obviously changed and it became more digital. There was a little bit of overlap for a while. For a while we were syncing dailies and then telesyncing them and then digitizing them so you'd have both film benches and Avids and Lightworks and whatnot in the cutting room and then that changed and then the film went away completely and then it was completely nonlinear. But we were still getting the material and digitizing it. Producers would just call us digitizers. You were getting the ingesting, as they call it today, and even that is now disappearing. So the job continues to evolve. Now we get dailies delivered on a drive. There's frankly less and less work to do for assistant editors in general. In the film days, you would have two guys on a small feature, for example. You'd have two guys syncing dailies. One avid assistant and an editor. It was a four-man crew. And then it became basically a two-man crew. And now it's almost getting to the point where if you work with someone like Steve, who's very involved in all of the technical processes, he's a better assistant editor than anyone I've ever met. He would be, in addition to being a great editor who does all his own music, who does all his own sound for the most part, there's frankly less and less to do. So it sort of depends on the editor as well, but the job is shrinking. It really is.
Carsten, did you have anything to share
I
on
do.
this topic?
I agree partially, but there is a tendency now where it actually goes the opposite way again. Like I know a couple of people, like for example the Fincher editorial on Social Network coming out tonight. They killed the telecine house. There is none.
Right.
Everything is in-house.
Right.
They always come on a drive directly into editorial. The assistant editors ingested Red Cine and whatever they have to do. They sync it, they prep it, they do line cuts.
Right.
It's a big crew.
If they do that stuff in the cutting room. A lot of places have a facility
Which
that
is
does
why I
that.
agree
Right.
with you. Like on my last show, Covert Affairs, exactly what you say.
Right,
We get a
right.
drive, it's all sunk up, you bring it in, you arrange the bins a little slightly,
Right.
and there you go. Check sync. But I agree. But they also my previous show, Make It or Break It, they now got rid of that process, and now the assistants again, they get the drive directly from set, they capture, they sync, they label and prep. So there's a tendency with the digital workflow now to basically cancel out the telecine house and
Right,
the preps
completely.
and bring that back into the editorial room, which will generate hopefully jobs again.
Yeah, no, that's a good thing.
That's the problem right now. They don't generate jobs.
Right.
You just load it on and
Right,
try
right.
to get it done.
Well, I have a question. Since now, in the old model, the assistant editor would be physically in proximity to the editor. There would be opportunities for all kinds of teaching and lessons and the chance to try your hand at an edit. Now that you're in different rooms than your assistant, are there opportunities to train your assistant? What are those opportunities? How do you take those opportunities to train your assistant? Diana?
Well, we tell them, like we've told Carsten, you know, you have to edit. And today it's even easier for you to learn to be an editor because we have digital media. You can cut. In the old days, you'd have to take the editor's film and cut it and resplice it. Of course, that was not allowed. Totally forbidden. You can't do that because the film would just end up as a mess of a million cuts. But today, it's fantastic. You can go to the editing room. You can take the dailies, as Carsten's been doing. He goes in at 7 in the morning, and that's what we encourage everybody to do, and cut and show it to your editor and ask them to give you a crit and to compare your cut to what they eventually do. And that's how you're going to learn. You basically teach yourself. But you've got all the opportunities, you've got a role model, and you have, you know, just incredible opportunities.
So you continue that relationship where you let you let your assistant cut, and then you critique what he or she has done.
I'm sure most editors, you know, will find the time, if you get on well with your assistant, you know, would be encouraging them to cut. That's what we do, and you know, as a way of teaching and saying, well, let's see what you can do. And, you know, so that you can move up and also become an editor, but you're not going to become one unless you have the practical experience of actually cutting. And on digital, it's fantastic. Mm-hmm. It's just a fantastic opportunity.
Stephen, I mean, do you agree with this? Is that how you work with your assistants?
I do, but in practical reality, it doesn't happen very much. I mean, I've mostly worked with very experienced assistants who haven't really wanted that. And Pete and I actually haven't really talked about this, but it's the job is, you know, my goal is to stay cut to camera, which means that whatever film comes in the morning, it's cut by the end of the day. And I can do that if I do absolutely nothing else. And I would encourage people to cut, but the reality is it doesn't happen that much. And my assistants haven't really wanted to. I mean, you can talk. We haven't discussed this.
No,
so
we haven't.
We can discuss this right in front of the group here.
Yeah, we can. Steve's right. I mean, rule number one is do no harm. You know, you can't hurt the movie. Right. We all got into this business to be artists in one way or another. So we're making this art project. We don't want to hurt that for any other reason. So if you don't have the time naturally as part of your workday to do that, you can't do it. It's not going to happen. In my situation, it's a little bit different. I don't know about Steve's other assistants, but because I have some experience as an editor, because I've cut a few things here and there, you know, in the feature environment, documentaries, things like that, I'm not absolutely starved like a lot of young assistants might be. I would encourage them to do what, you know, what Diana said, you know, with the permission of the editor.
Right.
It shouldn't take too much time away if they're sort of doing it on
it should be done
on the
after
side.
hours,
Yeah.
not during work hours. Work hours are work hours. We're saying come in, do it at night or early morning. Carsten came in at 7, his day doesn't start till 9. He had 2 hours of experience working and cutting stuff. The same scene, and then if the editor's willing, show it. Sorry.
But no, it's okay. But there's other ways to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, with Steve, you know, everyone knows how schedules are collapsing. Things are getting shorter and shorter. And we had a brutal schedule where we worked every day for almost 20 days. You know, Saturdays and Sundays included. And you know, when you're doing that, you just want to want to do your job, and then you want to go home. You know, have a beer and go to sleep, and then you go back to work. You know, so those sorts of things, you put them out of your mind. But if you do have a little bit of experience working as an editor and you find yourself working as an assistant again, you can still learn. The dailies come in every day. You're the first person to see them. That's pretty exciting. You get to see everything the director did. That's a cool thing. You know, you get to look at, it's actually a wonderful way to learn how to become a director, not only an editor. You see all the angles, you see all the setups. You've read the script, you look at the line script, you know what the coverage is. You're the guy who organizes the bin. You can look right at the bin and you can see all your setups and all your angles, and you can see, you know, and then once the cut's put together, you can see what was missing, what wasn't done, you know, and you can have a conversation with the editor about that, and you'd be surprised how often you find yourselves agreeing. Why didn't you do that? Oh, well, because he didn't give me that, you know. So there are opportunities to sort of be, once you've got your feet wet a little bit, to sort of self-educate.
So that's good. So I've heard so many people say that because the old system is broken, that being an assistant is not a path to learning how to be an editor. But it sounds like you guys don't really agree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that either.
No. There are ways and means you have to.
Yeah.
It was so much harder to cut way back when.
Yeah.
What do you think, Karsten?
Yeah, sorry.
I don't know. I did interrupt you. In a way, I think there will. There is when you are an first AD and assistant director, doesn't lead to directing at all. And I do fear that on big blockbuster movies, the big like Avatars, the Clash of the Titans, all the 3D movies, I do feel that those assistants will not go the path of editing. There will be a sort of a training ground almost. Like I've met a lot of them. They have been like around for a long time and are not interested in editing. It's just they know their terminal on Mac and they are very technical and they just do 3D conversions at home for fun and that's sort of their past. But I agree that there are still a lot of people out there that go into editorial because they want to cut. The thing is, you just have to take it outside the job. You again, like you work for free to get into assistant editing, you also work for free to get into editing. Basically, it's not just the normal path where you basically just assist on features for 8 years, 9 years, and then hopefully you get the call. You also basically cut a web series on the side, or YouTube videos, or a short film from a buddy from film school, and things like that. You do that on the side if you can after a 50, 60-hour work week. But you try, and that just kind of trying to juggle, and we can meet in 5, 10 years and talk again, and I hope I made that switch. But it's, it is tough.
So it sounds like being an assistant is still a path to being an editor, but maybe
Yes.
not in the past. You would be a part of one editor's team, and you'd work with that editor over a long period of time until that editor, gave you a break. Correct? Isn't that how it often worked in the past?
I think it still works that way.
It still works that way?
It's a path, but Karsten made a good example about the description between assistant director and director. The only thing those two jobs have in common is that they both have director in their name. And today, that's sort of the same thing with assistant editors and editors. Assistant editing has nothing to do with editing, almost nothing. You need a mentor who's going to teach you on the off hours when you have it, and along with sort of teaching yourself when you can. You just have to do it and get your hands wet. But it's, people are still going to hire you. People are still, that's still the path. That's still the best way to become an editor is through assistant editing. But, I hate to say it, but if I was a producer who knew about all of this, I would be extremely reticent to hire a first-time assistant editor who never cut before. Because, in fact, they might not have ever cut anything in their lives. It's not like camera, for example, where if you're a camera operator, you're doing something that is very, very similar to the DP, the next guy up. That's just not the case with assistant editing. So professionally, that's still the contemporary path, but the reality is that they are two very different jobs.
But I don't think that's really that different. In my experience, it was everything about the technology was different, but most of what I was doing all day long was syncing dailies, finding trims, putting trims back together, rewinding film splicing. That has very little to do with editing except for the physical aspect of it, and that's the same. I mean, you are using the same machine I'm using, so, and I think what's harder now is that there are fewer jobs. I think that's the bottom line is not that there's no way to learn, because there are ways to learn, and at the end of the day, I did what you did, which was come to my editors and go, I don't care what it is, if it's editing, I want to do it. And I'll do it at any time of day or night, it doesn't matter. Teach me anything you want to teach me. I was a sponge. And they knew it and I knew it, and so there were things I had to cut. But there were more jobs back then. Well, and we're all in an environment where the amount of employment is going down. And that's what makes it so hard to move up.
Well, one second, the technology has made it that, if anybody in essence can be an editor. What about the person who decides, forget the union system of apprenticed, assistant, editor, I'm just going to edit? I mean, is there anything to argue against that?
No,
Good luck.
I think if you've got talent and you can do it, and you find someone who's going to hire you, or you've done a film that is fabulous and somebody says, oh God, what great talent, you'd get a job non-union.
Because you can start the same way of just editing for free, right?
Yeah.
Until somebody likes it enough to hire you.
And they say, can you cut? Especially reality. I mean, that's just today an amazing place to start working, to get your feet wet.